So now we have our D&D Homebrewed origin story continued. The first settlers who came to the new continent of Melanour found a land with tremendous bounty, but also many dangers. They found a coastline with rich, fertile soil. The rainfall was plentiful. There were rivers, 3 great rivers that flowed from the mountains into the sea in protected harbors. They could build settlements, they could bring in ships and protect them from the storms. But the interior of the continent was filled with savage humanoid races who resented these new human intruders. Curiously, there were none of the 5 so-called civilized tribes, the humans, elves, dwarves, halflings, and gnomes, on this new continent. The elves were especially surprised since they expected this to be their homeland. But still, the populace grew, they built cities, they established a foothold on this continent. And more of those from Ambar came here, knowing that this was their chance to start anew, to form new living arrangements, to be free to worship their gods in this new land. As for Kroll, the discoverer of this great continent, his luck took a turn for the worst after his discovery. First, he was cheated of his land claims by various prominent families from Ambar who soon made their way to Melanour. He fought them in court for years, but came up with nothing. Finally, he decided to mount another expedition of exploration, this time from the western coast of Ambar. He now had a huge fleet of ships, with colonists eager to accompany the great discoverer, eager to make another finding. And they sailed off to the west, and were never heard from or seen again. And so in some ways, Kroll becomes an emblem for more than merely the discovery of the continent of Melanour. He comes as a warning, because with adventurers, great risks bring great rewards, but they can also bring disaster. And when an adventurer rolls the dice one too many times, he risks being lost in the mists of chance. And this is a lesson that is especially good for the player characters who come to run in your homebrewed campaign. Hello again, my name is KR King. This is my YouTube channel dedicated to creating a homebrewed campaign. And what we're going to do today is create a map. Now, I'm going to use Inkarnate to create my map. That's a free software you can find on the internet. I'm using the free version. It has a limited number of terrain and city tokens, but they're enough for me to use the map, and I want to use something that anyone else could use for free. I like the way Inkarnate, the maps kind of look cool. Then I'm going to import that to something else to put a hex structure on there so that I can more easily draw on that when the players are moving through the map. I always like to keep the map on the computer so that I can use it both tabletop and then if we're going to go to an online set. What I'm going to do is when I'm drawing this map, and I described a little bit in my introductory origin story, there's going to be like 3 major settlements and then some villages and hamlets. I'm going to name the geographic features that everyone would know about. Rivers, some mountain ranges, a few things close to where the settlements are. I'm also going to have other geographic cool things and areas, but I'm not going to worry about them right away because the players probably wouldn't know that much about them. You know, people have not traveled that far, or if they do travel that far, adventurers, they tend to guard these secrets. They tend not to just talk about them. You know, what's going to be generally known is going to be a certain radius of these settlements, but beyond that, only a few are going to know about them. I'm also going to name places, and the naming process is very important. It tells your players what kind of world this is, and once you give something a name, that's its name. You try to give provisional names, those become the names. I've done this for NPCs and other things, or when I'm writing stories or other dramatic works. When you give someone a name, it takes on a life of its own, which is really important, and we're going to talk about this when we talk about creating characters. So I'm going to go into Inkarnate. I've already worked on it about 2 hours, I think, overall. I've already drawn it up, and I'm not going to draw it up on screen because I feel like the time is better spent talking about this world. There's YouTube videos that explain how to run it. If you're at all familiar with any kind of mapping software, you should be able to use it quite easily. Obviously, there are other choices. You can draw paper and pen if you want as well. I just like to do it on the computer now. But again, the main thing is to have this area laid out. So I'm going to try the split screen here. I'm going to have the map main area, my face down in the corner. I'm going to try to, I'm not very technically savvy on this kind of stuff, so bear with me here. but I'm going to show you the map that I just created. So this we see here, this is the map that I made, as I mentioned, in Inkarnate. I spent a couple hours on this. If you've worked with Inkarnate, it's pretty intuitive as to how to do things. If you've ever used any of these mapping software, the thing I like about it is the maps look kind of cool. I don't put the hexes on this within Inkarnate, and I have my reasons for that. I put it on in something else, or I just bring in a blank map if you're going to go into like Fantasy Grounds or something to run online and create the hex thing there. But even if I'm going to run this as a tabletop, I like to use another program, another kind, because sometimes I've had issues with once I create a hex in Inkarnate, I can never seem to get rid of it, even when I put the totally blank it out. It may just be me, but that's what I do. So this map, as you can see, I've got all these, the settlements identified, some of the major landmarks. I'm always thinking in terms of what would people that live in these towns, what landmarks, what things would everyone know? What would be general knowledge? And so I always have these kind of things to start with. Then when they explore, again, maps are going to be tremendous currency in this world. People that have them and have made them, they're going to jealously guard them because information is power. But this is going to be basically what everyone knows. So if we zoom up here to this is going to be kind of our main area. There's Elsinox that I mentioned, the major city, Dramos, Maneth. Names are very important. Names tell your players, just like they do in a book or a film, they tell them what kind of world this is. Is it serious? Is it a little silly? Whatever. This that I'm creating, I'm trying to create this a little bit more serious. Also, you can have names that evoke certain things, and I've done things. So, for example, like I have this town of Dramos. Dramos, is that Balkan? Is that sort of Eastern European? Asper's Landing, that seems more English. Nyzz, Maneth, all these, Gondon. What I'm trying to do is try to create a place that's sort of not anywhere. It sort of borrows all the traditions of, European languages, but kind of a mishmash. It's sort of like the old James Bond villain who has kind of a Central European accent of some kind, but you don't really know where he's from. That's what you're doing here. It's evoking a place, a fantasy setting, a place that's foreign and yet somehow familiar, because all of these creatures and everything that are drawn from a host of mythological traditions, I think that kind of goes with that when you have these kind of names. But names are really important, and I'll talk a little more about that when we start creating characters. I have here, as I said, Dramos, Elsa. I have these little villages in here. Then I have the rivers are all named because everybody would have those named. I have some areas, this Modrug Hills, this is kind of a nasty area. Notice too, in terms of the terrain types, pretty simple when you have the free version of Inkarnate. So I have the trees down here are heavy forests, really dense forests. Everywhere else it's kind of green, is just sort of light forest. And then I have around these, I have these hills, which are, hill hexes, and then maybe some rough barren around those, all around the hills. Again, I have this gorge up here. This is river flows through here, and these can always be fun places to run because it's very enclosed and mist, and things can live in there, and you have waterfalls and caves behind them and all that kind of stuff. I have this swamp up here to the far east. I haven't named it. I'm not sure if people know about that yet. It's quite a ways away. Maybe there are legends about it. I haven't decided, but swamps are great terrain because, again, all sorts of nasty things live there, lost temples, but it's deadly to go there. Here are the mountains. There's Mount Kroll. I'm calling this the Mountains of Teeth. Not the most original name, but just when I looked at these after I'd made them, I thought, oh, from a distance they might look like teeth. Again, not the cleverest. I haven't really named things down here. I had sort of thought that I was going to maybe have an elven settlement here and gnomes and stuff, but I'm not going to do that right now because I'm not sure at the present time how much travel people are going to do between those far-off settlements. It's still pretty wild. It's still pretty dangerous. So I think that the various humanoid races that make up the player character races are going to live in the town, in the community. They're all going to have their little sub-communities within this town structure. I have this Keep of Nyzz here, which is going to be our first dungeon setting. It's a wizard. He had a strange demise. So that's going to be fun for the characters to sort of, and I'll talk about dungeons. There's a certain suspension of disbelief, but dungeons can be really fun, and they're a great place to have secrets and solve mysteries. Again, I have these islands off here. These islands are always great for, I think I've got a little ruin kind of thing in here, but I'm not sure, I'm not going to worry about that right now because the players, especially if you start them at low levels, first or even third, are going to stay around their main city there, and you're going to give them plenty of stuff to explore. You're going to give them missions and jobs and things that people want them to do to help out as they start to embark on their adventuring career. So everything is going to be right around here. And I have these like Asper's Landing. I have these across the river little settlements. Here down here below Elsinox, I've got the flats, and I'm thinking that's going to be kind of a criminal or a very tough town, the wrong side of the river kind of thing. But that'll be cool in terms of rogues and that kind of thing. Again, I'm going to start with Dramos, but I'm going to have the leading families, the leaders of these 3 towns, because people would probably, your player characters would probably know who those people were. All right, once you've got this map, I like to put a hex map on top of it. As I mentioned, maps are really important. You want your characters to map out the world. You want to know where you are in space. Also, how much time it takes to go places. Maps are really helpful for that. You want to keep a time record of how long things are taking. Once the players start to work in concert or against other NPCs, the time and the distance becomes important in terms of if they're competing for some object or some situation, if they're being chased or they're chasing someone, all this kind of stuff, the mechanics of the game, as I mentioned with the using miniatures, thinking about the mapping the world and having a hex structure. So if I'm going to do one for tabletop, I'll go to another program, well, I think I've got an example here. Let's see. This is the Gimp program, basically the same map, and I've taken in, I've put this hex structure on here. What you typically want to do is I used to do 5 miles. I've since then kind of adjusted this to 6 miles. I can put a link in the bottom of this video to explain. I've looked at some sites and I think 6 miles is good. And if we do have 6 miles, obviously we've got a lot of territory here to explore. So now we've got our map. All right, so that's the map that I've created for my Frontier Homebrewed campaign. And I would urge you, if you are going along in this series and you are trying to create your Homebrewed campaign, create a map. And have fun with it. Create, the coastlines and the geographic things. Give it some settlements. Again, if you're using the Frontier thing, which again I'm encouraging for this example, everything is going to be different. Even though you've got the same idea, the Frontier thing, you're going to create things differently from what I am. But the idea is having fun creating these places, thinking about who might live there, where your monsters and your humanoids are going to be, just giving it enough to start. You don't have to worry about populating the whole thing. Notice I'm just going to be starting with these 3 major settlements. Maybe I'll have an idea who lives in the villages. Again, if the players want to go there, we'll talk about improvising. But really, I'm just trying to create enough that the players would know about. And that means I got to populate these places. I've got to start creating my NPCs. Who are the players going to meet at first? Who are they going to know about that possibly at low levels they're not going to necessarily meet? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about what makes good characters. Characters that we read about in novels, that we see in films, and that we encounter in Dungeons and Dragons. Because if you have a sense of what makes characters real and what makes them seem not real, your characters will interact with your player characters in a way, again, they have that investment. This is a real world. These are real people I'm running into with real desires, right? And this will enhance the experience. And the thing about it is the players are going to start in kind of a small area, right, when they're at low levels. But when they see that the characters, even at these low levels, the characters that they're interacting with, the NPCs, the monsters, are rich with, inner lives, desires. They have connections with each other. They have knowledge about this area. The investment begins right at the lower levels. And they begin to work their way through this world, making their own connections, making their own relationships, good or bad, friend or foe. And that process is what's going to make your Homebrewed campaign achieve the sort of fun and excitement when you have the battles and the conflicts and everything. It's between characters, richly developed characters, and that's what's going to make it fun. So we're going to talk about what makes a good character.